Dr. Shabir Ali, welcome to Let the Quran Speak.
It's my pleasure to be on the show.
Now, there's a Christian pastor, DJ Soto, who has created a virtual church. And I wonder if you've seen some of the footage. So he's actually done a baptism online with avatars. What are your thoughts on that phenomenon?
Well, obviously, it's a strange world. I'm not.
I'm guessing you're not familiar with.
Yeah,
you're not very familiar with.
I had to do some research about this, and I had to watch the YouTube video showing him conducting this baptism. He sounds sincere as a pastor. The way in which he talks to his constituents, he gives them religious instructions and guidance. It seems like the kind of thing that will be done in a church. But seeing the avatars that represent the parishioners, one wonders if it has to be that way. So there's a Winnie the Pooh representing one person. There is a tiger.
Tigger.
There is a cat representing another person. And I thought I saw SpongeBob running across later on in the video, but I can't be too sure now. The girl who was baptized speaks with a man's voice. So all of this gives me the impression that while this is fulfilling a certain need, as it was designed to do, it is also catering to a certain level of fantasizing on the part of those who want to see themselves in this virtual church. I suppose that eventually the technology will develop to the extent where people might be able to get actual copies of themselves represented there in the scene, so they can actually see themselves as themselves, rather than see themselves as something that they're not. I don't know if it will get to that stage, but nonetheless, this is what I've been able to see so
I wonder how sustainable it is, because it seems like people are moving in and out of different scenes. So I get the feeling that people are exploring. It looks interesting, it looks fascinating, but it might not be something that they would come to consistently, let's say, week after week.
Yes, and the pastor behind this seems to be aware of that. He knows that this is going to be a transient sort of community. He knows that the personalities are such as would not want to be pinned down to structures and to the kinds of routines that people know from their regular church going. These are persons who want to be out of that regulated scene. They want to explore. They want to try new things, and naturally they're not going to stick with one virtual church. They're going to explore other virtual churches or virtual something else, perhaps. So this remains to be seen whether this will pick up as a phenomenon. Now, of course, for those of us who are not so much into the internet scene, we spend more. I myself, I would rather read a book on
the
a
older generation
page, yes, than to even read something online. But for those who are in that sort of internet age, I find that some of my grandchildren find great comfort in watching television screens, TV screens, computer screens. They're very savvy with flipping pages on the tablet and so on. So perhaps their experience is a little different, and we have to think broadly about this rising phenomenon and recognize that it is fulfilling some sort of a niche. Some people want this, and they're benefiting from that. But to what extent can our religion evolve to accommodate this kind of modern need? This, I think, is a very important discussion that we need to have.
I feel like there are two different things we're trying to balance. So respect for religion, because there's a certain culture to religion. You come to the mosque, you behave in a certain way, or you come to the church, you behave in a certain way. But on the other hand, being accessible and being open to all sorts of people, and people who are different, people who consider themselves outsiders. Right? So there's that balance that has to be maintained.
Yes. So how do we strike that balance in the existing physical places of worship? I think our places of worship need to be
Or
more
even
accessible.
even in the virtual world,
Yes.
how do you strike that balance, right?
Yeah, that's an important consideration. If we start with a physical space, there's already a struggle from starting with established norms and wanting to expand in order to be more inclusive, more accepting, and to reduce some of the constraints. Now, in the virtual world, it looks like we're starting from the other extreme of anything goes, everybody's free. You may be here today, gone tomorrow. We don't know your true identity. Even if you're here confessing a sin, we can't be really sure that you are who you say you are, and that the sin that you are confessing is real. We could not be sure of that in any other context, but of course we have more grounds for believing when the person is there in front of us and we can see the sincerity in the person and so on, especially if it's a person that we have had some lengthy association with. But here in the virtual world, all we see is Winnie the Pooh. And we know that we're not dealing with Winnie the Pooh.
I think an important part of religion is building community as well. And it's very hard to build that sort of community in the virtual world.
Yes, and the pastor behind this is already seeing one of the outcomes of this in that though he had sold his home out of sincerity for the church and he wants to reach out to people through in this virtual community, now he's having difficulty with funding for the continuation of his mission. So it's a very different world, and it comes with its constraints and limitations.
So I want to ask you about the wider implications, because yes, the church, that virtual church has its constraints, but can we think more broadly about, what kind of opportunities might be available for, let's say, Islam or other religions? For example, if we think of the Hajj experience, we think of Muslims maybe not being able to afford to go to a different country to perform the pilgrimage. And here's an opportunity. They put on a headset and they're at Hajj. Could that be considered them fulfilling their religious obligations?
It remains to be seen if in the future Muslim scholars will consider that to be a fulfillment. But for the moment, it is recognized that those who have the financial capability of performing the Hajj, but nonetheless lack the physical ability, can sponsor somebody else to go and perform the Hajj in their stead. So this is like, in a way, an avatar, but a real live person who you can trust to perform all of the rituals with all of the due sincerity and devotion that would be required of this service, to go and perform it on your behalf. Perhaps another stage will be for that person who is performing the Hajj on behalf of the sponsor to send pictures and even videos and even live stream some of the activity, so that the person who is at home in a foreign country can see his or her, can I say avatar, his or her representative who is there live in person performing the rituals, and one can then feel more involved in the whole process, rather than just thinking, okay, I just wrote a check and somebody else is doing that for me. I can just enjoy myself in a different way. But to be involved and to see the rituals being performed and imagine yourself being there on the scene. Here's my representative performing it on my behalf, but I wish I was there, and I can almost feel as if I'm there. If this kind of two-way communication continues between the sponsor and the representative in the Hajj. But
then that's a short walk towards saying, yeah, virtual reality is, it's not very far from what you're describing, right?
Well, yes and no. It is, there is a tinge of that virtual reality, but in this case, we have a real life person who is there and actually performing the actions and devotion to God. So if God is looking down and wondering, is anybody worshiping me? Well, there is a person who is actually going through all of this struggle and effort and hardship to please God.
So then the question becomes, well, how important is the bodily form to worship, right? Because it seems like what you're saying is that we need the body there. Let's think about prayer, for example. We're making certain movements. Is that really important, or is it something that's going on in the mind?
Of course, I see your point. There has to be a blend here between the sincerity of the heart and the actual expression on the human body, the physical effort that goes with that. So if we take prayer as an example, then as long as we're physically capable of going through the motions that are typical of the Muslim prayer, then we have to do that. We're obligated to go through, at least there are certain postures which are obligatory parts of the prayer that must be done. But if you do not have the physical capability to stand, then you can sit. If you don't have the ability to sit, then you can actually lie down and pray. And if you can move your head while lying down, then you move your head at certain junctures. If you can't even move your head, you move your eyelids. If you can't even move your eyelids, then you could pray mentally. So it shows that at the essence and the very core is the mental connection, and it's a spiritual connection between you and God. But of course, as much as you have the physical ability, then you must carry out the physical actions. So
of course, even in virtual reality, right, there are these 3D generated rooms, so you can actually pray. You can move your body, as in the baptism. So the girl was bending down, right? Or it's actually a man who was bending down for his baptism, as if he was immersed in water.
But then how does that translate to the actual person whose avatar we're seeing? So the avatar is bending down. Is the actual person bending down at home?
I believe so, yes.
Okay, then this is something that needs to be understood more and needs to be studied more. And thinking back now to the Hajj, Hajj has become a really crowded experience. I don't know if I'm saying that the right way. You have 3 million
Everyone
people.
wants to go to Hajj.
Yeah, everybody wants to go to Hajj.
And the
3
Muslim
million
population
people
is increasing yearly.
So there will come a day when severe limitations will have to be placed on this frequency with which people want to go and perform the pilgrimage. So if somebody is blocked from going to perform the pilgrimage because they've already done it last year and we have to give somebody else a chance to go this year, might it be possible for that person to get some experience of the Hajj while not being there physically in person, but is performing a voluntary pilgrimage, and there is some way of experiencing that pilgrimage while at home. Now, I should add to this that nowadays, prayers from the sacred sites in Mecca and Medina are being live streamed on internet sites. And some Muslims do tune into these live streaming events. So that gives you a sense that in a way I'm connected with that land and with the prayer that's being done there. It could almost feel as if you're there. Now, of course, various persons will have different reactions to this. Somebody will say, no, I'm not really there, I'm just going to the local mosque. But there may be some Muslim who is out there and thinking, well, you know what, they're praying, and I can pray along with them. And if that Muslim is sincere, and that's the real feeling that they have, and they feel really part of this, then we can think about somebody who's in a hospital bed. They cannot go to join any community for prayer, but they may be able to join such a live streaming event and feel very much part of that. Now, we have a halfway point towards this when we actually go to perform the Hajj nowadays, because the sacred mosque in Mecca can only hold so many people, even with all of the expansions. And so the surrounding hotels have dedicated prayer spaces without prayer leaders assigned for those spaces. The prayer leader is actually the leader in the mosque, and the hotel prayer spaces are actually overlooking the mosque. So if you're praying in one of these spaces and you're in the front row, you look through the glass wall and you can see the worshippers in the mosque below you. And so you get the feeling that almost as if you're there, almost as if your hotel prayer space is an extension of the mosque. But whereas if we go back to some classical books of Islamic jurisprudence and we ask if is this prayer valid, we may find stipulations that make us pause about this, because generally it is thought that if you have the ability to go and join up with those who are praying ahead of you, you have to go and join up. You can't leave a considerable gap between you and the worshippers ahead of you. If we think of the mosque situation, for example, it's line after line in prayer. You can't leave a large space either because you don't like the people ahead of you or you don't feel very social today, so you go off and you pray aloof on your own. If you're praying aloof, then you're not considered to have joined the congregation. But there, we're somewhat aloof. And in a way, this is a space for elite persons, because only those who are temporary residents in the hotel at the time would have access to that particular prayer space. It means that all and sundry are not welcome here. So that would have been like a no-no in classical Islamic jurisprudence. You can't have a dedicated prayer space for the elites. Even the king of the country, if he comes in, he prays shoulder to shoulder with all of the commoners in the common prayer space, and he does not have a designated prayer spot for himself. That's the king of the country. So here we have a place which is there for those who could afford to rent a room in one of these very fancy hotels, and yet this is obviously considered to be acceptable today, and many of us use that space. So gradually things change and evolve. Will it evolve to the extent that we are able to accommodate this kind of virtual reality mosque or have a virtual reality Hajj? This remains to be seen, but it has to be a continued and ongoing discussion.
All right, we'll leave it at that. Thank you for your time, Dr. Shabir Ali.
You're welcome.